talking about football?
Yeah, football. NFC North.
Then let's talk football.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Headed North, an NFC North podcast, and I'm your host, D-Tron. Now look, I don't pat myself on the back a whole lot. Well, that's not true. Sometimes I do. But after last week's games, I gotta tell you, I'm feeling pretty good about the way that I called last week. I told you that the Bears would get a win, even though I didn't see it happening like that. The Lions would get a win, even though I didn't see it happening in OT. I told you that the Green Bay Packers would make history and lose in their week one in Sao Paulo. Unfortunately, they did that and more by losing Jordan Love for at least a couple of weeks. And then I also told you that the Minnesota Vikings would look like contenders going against the Giants. And what do you know? The Giants came out and laid a dud, and the Vikings looked like contenders. All of that I said and a little bit more came true. All of that's going to lead us into the show where we're going to recap last week's games and then also give you a preview looking ahead for this week's games that we got on the slate. All of that, plus I'm going to include spreading the field at the end of this week's episode. As always, if you're listening, I greatly appreciate it. Feel free to like the podcast, share it with a friend, leave us some notes down in the bottom if you haven't already, and be sure to visit our sponsor, which is in the links below or in the link somewhere where you're listening, for Off Rack Shop. Off Rack Shop is an online thrift clothing store. They provide shoes, men's clothing, women's clothing, accessories, and more. So if you haven't already, check out the link. There is a discount available to those who are listening to the show today. All right, so we're going to get it kicked off with the Green Bay Packers, the same way the NFL got it kicked off in their game against the Eagles. Now, if I'm being honest, the Green Bay Packers came out and they looked clunky in this season opener. There was false starts. There were 12 men on the field. They're misusing timeouts early on in the game. Basically, they misused all of the timeouts in the first half, which for a young team is probably not that surprising, but for a team led by Matt LaFleur, that is kind of shocking for them to come out and be unprepared in the way that they were, making some very early mistakes. But they seem to pull it together. They were able to get some scores up on the board. Looking at my big board, Jaden Reed ended up having a huge day with 4 catches, 138 yards, a touchdown in the air, and a touchdown on the ground. Jacobs got it together later in the game. He ended up with just over 80 yards on the ground in his debut as a Packer. But I got to say that the real highlight of this week was Saquon Barkley. He got 2 on the ground, got 1 in the air. This was a huge debut for Saquon as an Eagle. This really puts everybody in the Eagles division on notice. But more about the Green Bay Packers. So Walker, Bullard, and Nixon all were getting busy. They were flying all over the field, and the Packers defense was able to come up with 2 big picks. You had Xavier McKinney and you had Zaire Alexander, who both got interceptions on this Philadelphia Eagles team. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough. And in the process of Green Bay taking a loss, they also lost Love. So Love got an MCL injury on the second to last play of the game, which could put him out of action for 3 to 4 weeks, which would be major because Malik Willis is the backup. And if you don't know who Malik Willis is, that's actually not that surprising. He played for the Tennessee Titans, but never really got it going, and he was acquired by the Green Bay Packers this year. And it just hasn't, I just can't, man, I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around this. Without Jordan Love, this changes the future of the Green Bay Packers. I mean, I've even got it changing next week's game because his role in this team was going to be so pivotal. Speaking of next week, so I guess I should probably note they lost 34-29, but I'm sure you already know that by now. So next week, the Green Bay Packers have the Indianapolis Colts. Now, I originally had this on the slate as a win for Green Bay, but not anymore, especially not the way where Anthony Richardson came out and made the Colts look against the Texans this past week, and they barely lost that game. I've got the Indianapolis Colts going into Lambeau and getting a win if Green Bay doesn't have Jordan Love, which it is looking like they will not have him, and Malik Willis will be starting. All right, next, we're going to go to the Chicago Bears. And well, I told you that they would get a win, but who saw no offensive touchdowns being scored by the Chicago Bears and them still being able to win a game by a touchdown. This is crazy. Watching this game, because I watched it from beginning to end, I had to see it. Caleb looked like a rookie, which is what you expect him to do. The Titans, on the other hand, came out and they looked dominant early on. Pollard, I didn't have high expectations for him. He came out and played a huge part in that offense. They did get D-Hop in for week 1, although he wasn't all that productive. Will Levis didn't look half bad as a quarterback through the first half of the game. But then, for whatever reason, or I don't know what prompted it, but the Chicago Bears defense really woke up. And I think it was largely sparked by a blocked punt that was returned for a touchdown. When that was returned by Jonathan Owens, you could see that the energy shifted for the Chicago Bears and that team. Now, again, the offense couldn't get it done, but the special teams was able to get that return for a touchdown. The defense finished the game with a pick 6. And then Cairo Santos knocked in multiple field goals. So again, the special teams and defense are really what did it for the Chicago Bears during this game. And again, I told you they would win. I didn't see it happening like this, but it's kind of exciting that they can still get a win without having an offensive score. And it's because their defense is elite. I know, it's early on in Chicago, but their defense is really that good. Edwards was running around making all kinds of tackles. I think he had something like 10 tackles in the game. They were all over the field. That defensive secondary looked really good. The front line even looked pretty good without having that major defensive end that you kind of expect teams to have nowadays. They just looked really good in this performance. So they carried. But I don't know that they're going to be able to carry next week without the offense getting involved. Look, Caleb was 14 of 29 and had less than 100 yards passing. That's not going to win you a whole lot of games in the NFL. So he even had, and again, he's a rookie, but he has this play where he loses like 19 yards trying to scramble around and figure out something to keep the play alive instead of just throwing the ball out of bounds or going down. He's trying to do all this extra stuff like he's in college. He's got to cut that out, right? Again, I know he's a rookie, but he's got to figure it out pretty quick if he wants to turn some of these close games into winnable games for the Chicago Bears if the defense isn't playing at an elite level like they did last week. The pick 6 was impressive. The blocked punt for a touchdown was impressive. What unfortunately wasn't impressive was all of the offensive weapons that I thought Caleb would be able to get the ball to. And that's okay, except Keenan Allen also re-aggravated an injury at the tail end of that game, putting his status for next week in question potentially, and that could be one less weapon that Caleb has, which actually could benefit him because it might pare down some of what he needs to do with the ball. Start looking for his top target, DJ Moore, and maybe even getting Cole Kmet involved in the game, unlike what he did last week. But next week, I think it's going to be tough because they're taking on the Houston Texans in Texas. That's not going to be good for them if their offense can't get clicking. Look, the Texans put on a quality performance against the Indianapolis Colts, mainly because of C.J. Stroud. I don't see the Chicago Bears being able to go into NRG and get a win against the Texans, but we will see because they're going to play each other this upcoming week. I just think that the offense for the Houston Texans are going to be too much, and that defense is super stout. Third up on the list this week to talk about is the Minnesota Vikings. And can I just say, I told you so. For all of I had some Giants fans really giving me a hard time because I said that the Minnesota Vikings were going to beat them and that the Giants weren't a good team. The audacity. What did you think was going to happen when you've got Danny Dimes, Drew Lock, and Tommy DeVito as your quarterbacks, and a game plan that looks like a high school football team? The Giants came out and laid a dud. They got 2 field goals, and they made Sam Darnold, just like I said, look like the second coming. They made it look like the Minnesota Vikings are true contenders, and I knew this deception was going to happen. That's why I told you, go with the Vikings for the win, because the Giants just can't seem to put together winning football. There was a highlight, Malik Neighbors, like I mentioned. He ended up being the top yardage receiver for the Giants. But he was like 66 yards on 5 catches. It's not a whole lot. Daniel Jones just isn't the guy, and I don't know as I reflect back Why they would dare pay him and not pay Saquon, it just blows my mind why an organization would do that. But I digress. Let's talk about the Minnesota Vikings. Aaron Jones, he was a valuable pickup for them. He got them nearly 100 yards on the ground, really giving them some balance and taking some of the pressure off of Sam Darnold. Although Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson didn't show up huge when it comes to yardage, Justin Jefferson did catch a touchdown. They combined for a little under 100 yards between the two of them. Sam Darnold looked serviceable. 2 touchdowns, an interception, and a sack. But all in all, Sam Darnold provided the Vikings exactly what they needed. Veteran presence and a person who can deliver the ball where it needs to go. But the real highlight of this game, and this is probably a combination of Brian Flores' defense and the Giants just being really bad, is the defense showed up big. They had 5 sacks plus 2 interceptions on that Giants team. Like, the Vikings really put on a defensive performance that made you believe that given the right circumstances, they have a chance to win closer to maybe 8 games this year if they can continue that. I just don't know that the offense is as good as this win might make you believe that they are, because it was against the Giants. Like, I just can't get over that. They're just so bad. But whatever. We got a win from the Vikings, and not just a win. The Vikings crushed the Giants 28-6. It honestly never felt close. Next week, I think, is a different story, though, because the Vikings are going to take on the 49ers in Minnesota. I think being at home will help Minnesota, but I don't think it will help them enough to get a win against a 49ers team that looked pretty good in their opener against the Jets. Granted, they had a lot of field goals. Like, Jake Moody put up like 5 field goals in that game, giving them quite a few points. But still, Brock Purdy looked solid. The running back filling in for Christian McCaffrey looked solid. Debo got a touchdown. So the 49ers still look dominant like they did last year. Not as offensively dominant because, again, they didn't score through the air. But I think they beat the Vikings here. I think we're going to see the sort of regression begin with the Sam Darnold era. Unless, and I have one big caveat, unless Sam Darnold has some insider information that he can use to better prepare to take on this 49ers team, because he did play for them. So he may have some insights into how they perform and prepare, and maybe he knows some things that they'll do that he can share with his team about the way that this team is going to approach them and attack them. But I just don't know if that's going to be enough to get them over the hump and get them to win against the 49ers. And last, but certainly not least, are my Detroit Lions. Get the season opener started with a bang, baby. We're going to get a win, and we're going to get a win in OT. We're never going to let them touch the ball again. Let me back up just a little bit. The Rams came to play. The Rams were also pretty injured. They had a revolving door at offensive line. Unfortunately, within the game, Puka Nacua ended up getting hurt and going out of the game, not able to come back. But Matthew Stafford still had his number one target, Cooper Kupp, and Cooper Kupp ate. He caught the ball a lot, like 14 times, over 100 yards of production. He was killing us on the quick out all game. The motion was allowing Matthew Stafford to really figure out what the defense was doing, and he was eating them alive with Cooper Kupp. But with all of that said, the Lions started the game hot. They were up, then they went down, then they had to try to come back at the end. This was a really good season opener. The Lions secondary looked much improved. Even though Cooper Kupp did get over 100 yards, you could see that the young additions to the secondary were playing their role. Terry and Arnold, like these guys played well in the secondary, despite what Cooper Kupp was able to do. He was really the only one that was able to get loose and get that kind of yardage on the team. So Matthew Stafford did throw for over 300 yards, but that's almost per the course for Matthew Stafford whenever he's on the field. Anzalone, Jack Campbell, Aiden Hutchinson, they were causing absolute havoc out there. Anzalone was everywhere. Jack Campbell was everywhere. And then Aiden, they just couldn't do anything with him. He was hitting him with the spin move, the big swipe, everything that he was doing was working, and Matthew was having to get that ball out of there to his first option really quickly. So the defense was swarming, and that felt really good as a Lions fan to see that happening. And then you had the emergence of J-Mo. He came out and had a huge game, and it almost felt like this was the game plan. It was to take advantage of his speed over the top against a secondary for the Rams that is a bit older. They got the ball to Williams 5 times for like 121 yards and a touchdown. The kid is just fast. And if you can put together some consistent production from him, man, he's going to be a great addition to that Lions team. Another star of the show, David Montgomery. I told you in last week's show you were going to see some more ground and pound. And that last drive in OT was a prime example of why they gave him a break in like the tail end of the second quarter into the third quarter, and they began to use Jahmyr Gibbs a little bit more, is to keep David Montgomery fresh. Give him an opportunity to, when you get that ball in OT, never give the ball back. And they just kept handing the ball off to him. And that offensive line, dude, they were so dominant as they went down on that OT drive. It was really good to see. I wish that they would have never found themselves in that position because they did have a lead. And if they could have held on to that lead, then you don't have to fight to win an OT. But a win is a win. And it really showed their character getting the year started off in that way. I mentioned Gibbs contributed like 75 yards between run and pass. You also had some really good stops by the defense in the red zone. This was something that you saw in the playoff game last year as well. They may have bent and allowed the Rams to get down into the red zone, but so many times they stopped them from scoring touchdowns, even getting an interception in the end zone on Matthew Stafford, which, again, was really a telltale sign for what this defense can be as they pull it together. It was a pretty quiet day for Amon-Ra St. Brown and Laporta, but honestly, they didn't need it to be able to get the win, and I think we see more of them in next week's game. And next week's game is against a team that they're familiar with because they also played this team in the playoffs last year, and that's the Buccaneers. I think Baker Mayfield is looking good this year. They beat up on a Washington Commanders team last week, and I think they're going to be coming into Detroit feeling pretty good about themselves. And I still think the Lions will get the win. I think that win is going to come with some more involvement from Amon-Ra and Laporta. But again, the rushing attack, the two-headed monster that they have going on with David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be one that is going to help them win each and every week. But I'm excited to see how they're going to approach this game against the Buccaneers. All right, so I am going to give you guys spreading the field today, and I'm going to use my big board in the back to help you with ways that you could potentially win against the spread this week. Now, this is not betting advice. I feel like I have to let you know that, although use it at your discretion. I'm taking Indy over Green Bay at -3.5. I would love it if I can get this thing at -2.5 because I feel like it will be a close game, potentially 2 field goal win by Indy. But I'm taking them to beat Green Bay in Lambeau. And this is all, again, predicated on them not having Jordan Love. I'm taking the 49ers to beat the Vikings -6.5. And honestly, I feel like you could take this line all the way up to -9.5 and still feel good. I think there's a 10-point win coming for the 49ers in this game in Minnesota. I'm taking the Buccaneers +7 against the Lions. Now, I feel like 7 is a lot in the NFL, especially when you have 2 quality teams. I think the Buccaneers are going to keep this thing close. I think the Lions win somewhere between 3 and 7 points. I don't think you get the win if you take the Lions -7. There's a much greater chance that you end up with a push. And last but not least, I'm taking the Texans -6.5 to beat the Chicago Bears. Now, I would also love it if this was a -5.5 spread, because I think there's a real chance that this thing gets close if Chicago's offense can wake up and figure out how to go out there and score. And if they do that, this could turn into a 2 field goal game, 6 points. So if you could get it -5.5, I would prefer it there. But certainly, I think the Texans are going to win this game. So if you're getting it at -6.5, I'd take that too. All right, that is the show for the day. Thank you very much for listening. Again, if you've made it to this point, I appreciate you listening. You may be able to send us a message by sending us a text. Check out the description on this podcast, and there's usually going to be a link available for you to communicate right with us, or you can reach out to us on Instagram or YouTube. We're Headed North Podcast. If you come back next week, which I hope you do, make sure you've got your bags packed because we are headed north. I'm D-Tron. Peace.
Are you still talking about football?
Yeah, Papatel, NFC, North.
Then let's talk football.